So why don't we just start?
Whenever you're ready.
Welcome to another episode of Authors Reads and my guest, J. Craig Williams. He will be reading from his book, How Would You Decide 10 Famous Trials That Changed History, and his children's book, The Sled. Welcome, Craig.
I very much appreciate you inviting me to your show.
But before we get to the reading, I have a couple questions about your background as an author. So if you could just say a few words about why authorship entered your life and when did it do that?
Well, I started writing a legal blog, uh, oh boy, back in 2003, I think. And it was published for a number of years. And it got picked up by law.com, which was at that time one of the big legal websites. And it was featured on the front page for a number of posts that I had written. And then I was contacted by Kaplan Publishing, and they were looking for someone to write a legal book. And the person that contacted me suggested that I take all of the individual episodes or posts, I guess, that I had written and combine them into an organizational outline and then put them into a book. So at that point in time when she contacted me, I had several years worth of posts that I had put up. So it was easy to simply write an outline for a book. My first book was called How to Get Sued, an instructional guide. And it was funny stories about stupid things that people do to get in trouble with the law, like the guy who robs the convenience store with a staple gun and then runs across the street after he gets chased away and jumps the fence and lands himself in the local prison yard. So kind of silly things like that. And then Kaplan Publishing published it, sent me on a book tour, which was very exciting. I got to go to book shows and people lined up in front of me to get my autograph on the books, which I thought was really funny. And I went on a number of radio shows in New York and Chicago and Los Angeles, and the book got a good amount of attention. I guess it kind of all came from one of my blog posts when someone that I knew entered it in the Los Angeles Press Club as a entry for that year, and it won first place and beat out the Los Angeles Times. So it's my
So
writing
it's
got.
an outgrowth of your work as a lawyer, and is that your background?
Yes, I'm an attorney, and one of the things that attorneys have to do all the time is write. So I was really bad at it when I graduated from college, and so I worked really hard at it and made it one of my best skills. And 3 books later, I would say it's one of my best skills.
When you write something and it's done and you look at it, how would you describe a good paragraph or section of yours?
Well, that's you know I've taught legal writing in school, and I think the thing that really stands out is to get your point across first in the very beginning. I like the old style of journalism when you learned the who, what, where, how, when, and why when you read the first sentence of a newspaper article.
The inverted pyramid.
Exactly. So I think my style of writing is to put it all in up front, put in a couple of sentences that kind of explain it, and then a transition sentence that leads into the next thought. So that's a typical paragraph for me.
When you were a kid, what kind of books did you like to read?
Oh, um, don't really. I remember reading the books that we got from school in the scholastic,
Oh, yeah.
those books that were handed out, and that you went home and got a dime or a nickel from your grandmother and got a book to read. I would say that those were my favorites. They kind of led me into long term reading. When I was in high school and college, we got into Dostoevsky and some pretty intense reading, Melville and so forth. And so it changed quite a bit. But I think my most enjoyable reading was as a kid. Yeah.
What do you remember then and or now? What were your favorite authors? And or what? role models. When you read somebody else's work and you read and you say, that's a good book, what is that typically to be?
Well, as a lawyer, I've read all my life, and even to the point of reading the side of cereal boxes. Um, but I think my favorite author of all is Tom Clancy. He's now dead, and there's a lot of ghostwriters, a couple of that have worked with him, but his books are amazingly detailed. I enjoy the plot changes from chapter to chapter. It's a fun story to read, and it's definitely different than the boring legal stuff I read all the time.
So tell us, why did you decide to write 10 famous trials, and how did you select the Salem Witch Trial as one of the 10?
I got persuaded to write a second book by my publisher, Kaplan Publishing, um, and they wanted me to look at famous trials from the perspective of a trial lawyer. I've been a trial lawyer for nearly 40 years and really enjoy it. So, my publisher and I sat down and kind of sketched out 10 famous trials that she thought would be interesting to people. I was born in Massachusetts, so the Salem witch trials to me have always been of interest because it was a thing I grew up with in grade school and heard about, and just couldn't believe that people would do that kind of thing to other people. And so I really wanted to delve into it and understand why it happened and what lessons we should learn from it.
What lessons should we learn from the Salem Witch Trials?
I would say that they're the same lessons that we need to learn today, and that's that we've heard the term witch hunt in our current political climate, but I think it's the person that's screaming witch hunt that is really the one who needs to be hunted here. But in the case of the Salem witch trials, the lesson I think to draw from that particular issue as it relates to today is that you cannot go along with fear and division among people to live in a community. There was a couple of children who supposedly ingested ergot or rye seed or rye bread that had gotten mold in it. And supposedly that's an LSD trip. And these children started spouting all kinds of crazy things about witches, and people were in a depressed economic time. It was winter. They were superstitious, and they didn't have good, solid, rational thinking. And I think that that's really what's missing today. So I think the lesson to draw from it is really one of understand the community that you're in, understand that people are different, don't operate on the basis of fear, and and go along with the crowd.
I read at least the summary from your website of the Salem Witch Trials, and there seemed to be a lot of institutional checks on, say, the madness of the crowds, and they did not function. Why do you think that? Is that true? And why do you think that happened that way?
I think it happened that way because the people that were appointed, first of all, the governor himself was a treasure hunter. So he was elevated to the position because he was wealthy and not very intelligent. Um, not to mirror today's time. No, not at all. But on top of that, the governor then appointed a couple of merchants from the town to act as judges with no legal training. I mean, I note in the book that the closest lawyer was 3,000 miles away in England. So you have people untrained in the law. You have a hysterical society of people that are screaming that my cow died because the old lady next to me put a curse on it. So you have superstition. The merchants didn't know enough about the law to be able to put a stop to it. That was one of the checks and balances that didn't work. Another one was the expert witnesses. You had Cotton Mather from Boston who written about witches, and his book was a bestseller at the time and apparently fed the hysteria that existed in Salem. So you have religious leaders who are feeding the hysteria, you have untrained people who are trying to judge it, and you have a screaming populace. So the checks of society really didn't exist in that. The thought of let's kill all the lawyers that Shakespeare and that a lot of people quoted doesn't include the lead into it, which is if you want anarchy, then let's kill all the lawyers. So I think without lawyers, without judges, without trained people in place that were bent on protecting themselves, it sounds very much like what's going on today. But I think that's what happened back then, and the checks and balances didn't work like they're being tested today.
Is there anything else you'd like to say before you read your excerpt from 10 Famous Trials?
I would say for anybody listening that wants to be an author, the hardest part about it is getting started. If you sit down and just sketch out an outline, maybe 10 points that you want to cover in a book, depending on this kind of style of book you want to write, children's book is a little bit more difficult. I think the hardest book that I've written was a book for children because you have to appeal and understand your audience. So pick the kind of book you want to write, whether you want to write the great American novel, whether you want to write a historical review, whether you want to write a children's book, and just start writing. Get an outline and start writing. I've been tasked to write 4 more chapters over the next year for the next version of the In Dispute podcast episode that the book got turned into on the Legal Talk Network. So these 10 chapters are out and available as miniseries episodes that you can listen to the lawyers and the judges and the witnesses talk about or read actually from the transcripts, and then me give some kind of narration about what's happening in the trial, why it's happening.
So let's hear you read an excerpt from the Salem Witch Trials.
Okay.
Okay.
This is chapter 2 of my book, How Would You Decide 10 Famous Trials That Changed History. The website is 10famoustrials.com. You can buy it on Amazon or you can buy it on Ingram. So, this is the Salem Witch Trials, and it says, Step into the shoes of a witch. You are a fine, upstanding member of the community and well respected by all, having lived for years in Salem, part of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, in the year 1692. Unfortunately, you've just been accused of a supernatural crime that'll almost certainly end with your death by hanging as a result of grand jury proceedings you knew nothing about. But don't worry, things will get worse before they get better, if you can even look at it that way. After your indictment and arrest, you'll be thrown in jail in the middle of a brutally cold New England winter where the temperatures are below freezing. Because you are a woman with virtually no money and little standing in society, you won't be able to pay your jail fees. So you'll only get the food your family brings to you on occasion. You'll be bitter cold because you can't afford the firewood, and to top it off, the jail leaks, allowing the wind and snow to enter your cell. Plus, you may languish in jail for 4 or 5 months before you go to trial. Perhaps by then it will warm up if you're still alive.
I like your style. That
Thank you.
you immediately understand the implications and they get the environment. I mean, having to buy firewood.
Yes, isn't that crazy? And your food, and pay the jailer to keep you there.
And I assume he was not the kind and caring jailer you could expect from literature.
No, because the jailer knew, just like everybody else in town, that you were shortly going to hang.
So why bother?
Why bother?
What do you think accounts for this madness overtaking a society?
It does only take one person to start the madness, the person who complains, because you're different. You're saying things that I don't understand. You must be a witch.
Okay. Well, let's talk about your children's book. You described it as a different process than writing 10 famous trials.
Right. Well, one, the 10 Famous Trials is an analytical look at the trials and kind of a very informed view of why they turned out the way they turned out. I, quote hearsay rules and explain those and explain why evidence comes in and other evidence then comes in and how things occur in the case. So it's very scholarly, I guess, in a way. And the children's book, on the other hand, I wanted a book that I could leave for my grandchildren, in particular my granddaughter and grandson, so that they would have something to remember their grandfather by. And I thought, why not write a little book for her? It's about 20 pages long now in the book, and there's only a few lines per page. When I started writing it and when I finished it, it was about 100 typewritten pages. So a huge
Good
long
Lord.
story that I had to cut down into and just cut down and cut down and cut down. And I had one of my friends, Daniel Singer, who you probably know, Rover,
Hmm.
uh, did the editing for me on the book. I had my publisher. This book was published by Crimson Cloak Publishing, a different publisher than my first and third book. Well, actually, Crimson Cloak Publishing published the third one as well. But this little book it's a fun one. I'll read to you from the start of it. About
Actually,
Go ahead.
is your granddaughter a character in this book?
She is. Her name is Naomi Joe. Her mother is in the book, my daughter. Her father, who's my son in law, also in the book is my first dog, Duchess, and a bighorn ram. I serve on the Bighorn Institute board of directors out in Palm Springs. So that's a near and dear charity to me. And I included a snow leopard in here as a character just for some variety and because it's always been an animal that's uh, I've always loved.
How old was she when you wrote it?
Seven, 7, I
Have
think.
you had occasion to read the book or give the book to your grandchild and explain the differences and the similarities between the two characters or between her character and herself?
Oh yeah, I have read the book with her and to her. Her mother is has an organic farm, and they sell at farmers stands, and they have their own farm stand, and they also sell at farmers markets. So she has a number of copies of her book, and she sells her book at the farmers markets up in Crescent City and up in Oregon. She's very proud of it. She wanders around with it, waves it, and says to people, "This is my book. This is about me," which is kind of fun. At 7 years old, she was a precocious little girl. Um, and now I think she's 10 or 11, and she's grown into quite a young lady. So this book was written a little bit more when she was precocious, and now fits her as a very wise and thoughtful young lady.
What a wonderful gift.
There's another one in the works. My fourth book, I'm writing for my second set of grandchildren, Stallard and Tiago. Stallard is a Viking, or I'm sorry, Tiago is the Viking, and Stallard is a pirate sailor here from the United States, and they meet in the middle of the ocean and they have a fight, and then become good friends, and then sail around the world. And there's a little story about them doing that. It hasn't been published yet, but I haven't finished it as well.
Well, I would love to hear that one as well when it is available. But
I'll get
now
in
we're
touch.
going to hear an excerpt or as much of the sled as you want.
It was just a few nights before Christmas when Naomi had the dream. In it, she saw a man wearing an old silk hat catching snowflakes on his tongue. His eyes twinkled as each snowflake landed. It seemed like magic. Then the man took off his hat and touched it to Naomi's head. As he did, she felt a shiver go through her. She stuck out her tongue and caught a snowflake on it, and as she did, she felt her eyes twinkle too. Suddenly, the wind blew the old man's old silk hat away. Off it went into a swirl of snowflakes. As he ran to catch it, he disappeared into the blizzard. But his hat blew over a steep cliff. and knocked loose an icicle that was hanging from that cliff. The magic hat landed right on top of the broken off icicle, and the icicle came to life as the Frost King. The Frost King had been an icicle for so long that he had lost his family and friends. He felt lonely and unloved, and his heart was as cold as the icicle he had become. Now he wanted to freeze Christmas so nobody could enjoy it, and they would all feel as miserable as he did. Naomi woke from her dream suddenly and heard her mother call, "Breakfast!" It took a minute for her to shake her head loose from the dream. It seemed so real. In his grease stained overalls and an old silk cap, Paul the junkyard man watched Naomi as she walked to school. He noticed her stop and stare at the new sled in the toy store window. When he saw her head droop in disappointment, Paul walked over and offered to help Naomi build a sled from his junkyard parts if her mother agreed. When Naomi asked her mom, Julie, she thought it was a grand idea. It will give you and Paul a chance to become better friends, she said. Naomi wondered why her mom wanted them to become better friends. Naomi and Paul finished Naomi's junkyard sled the day before Christmas. Now she could go sledding with her classmates. But when she got to the hill at Fox Country Club, she saw her friends with their store bought sleds, and she stopped walking. She looked down at her junkyard sled, and her head drooped again. Embarrassed, Naomi instead turned toward Bear Canyon, where her classmates wouldn't see her junkyard sled. She was walking with her head down, and she didn't see the sign that said, "Danger, steep cliff." Naomi got on her sled and pushed to go down the hill. She didn't see the steep cliff soon enough to stop. She fell to the bottom, but the magic twinkle in her eyes saved her from harm. She landed in the cold snow and quickly fell asleep. When she did, she had another dream. She dreamed that she woke up, but she was trapped in a jail of tall icicles built by the Frost King. She wasn't completely alone, however. The bighorn ram watched from a high perch on the cliff as Naomi fell. He bounded down the icicle jail to help her. Two of his friends followed him, Duchess, the sled dog, and Bella, the snow leopard. Kingston and the other animals' eyes had that twinkle too, and they each noticed the twinkle in Naomi's eyes as she fell. Kingston lowered his strong ram horns and broke a big hole in the icicles that imprisoned Naomi. "I still can't get out," Naomi said. Duchess and Bella rushed in to help. As Duchess pulled and Bella pushed, Kingston whispered to them, "She's the twinkle girl who saves Christmas, just like in the legend. I saw it in her eyes." Once Naomi and her junkyard sled were free, she thanked the animals. They replied, "Hurry! The Frost King is coming." Naomi looked up in alarm. And that's part of the story.
This book has illustrations. Could you describe who did them and what they produced?
The illustrations were done by Amelia Bernstein. Amelia is a deaf woman who my wife, who Christine Bartley Williams, who's an American Sign Language interpreter, she interpreted Amelia's college degree at Chapman University for all 4 years. Amelia is an animation artist. She's worked for Disney. And I gave her photographs of Naomi. I gave her photographs of bighorn rams. I gave her photographs of our dog Duchess. And she drew all of the illustrations in the book.
I enjoyed the illustrations I saw.
They're a lot of fun.
Overall, how do you fit authorship into your day-to-day life and career?
It doesn't really fit into my day to day life and career. I have to really make a point to take time out in order to write um, anything other than legal things because that's what I do most of the time. And I occasionally get the opportunity to go to a book reading or like this, a podcast. So it's just a moment in time and generally get back to being a lawyer and being a dad and grandfather and all the other crazy things I do.
What do you see as the benefits to being an author?
For the sled, for me, it was the opportunity to give lifelong present to my granddaughter. we all at some point in time will die in the future, and I'm sure I will too. But my granddaughter will live long after I'm gone, and this is an opportunity for her to know me and know that I loved her and that she has someone with her all the time, and that really this book I wrote for her to tell her, show her that she can do anything. If she can save Christmas, she can do anything. So, the other books, it gave, I think, writing a book and publishing it as a lawyer gives you a little bit more credibility to your clients that you're a published author. I think it helps your bottom line resume. But more for me, it gives me the chance to sit down and really delve into something I enjoy, which is trials.
And you get to think about sort of larger issues rather than did your client jump the fence into the prison guard's recreation room?
Right. Yeah, it does. It gives me a moment to kind of drop out of practicing law and still use my skills that I've learned in practicing law to be able to write.
If you were to write something right now, would it be a legal thing or would it be another children's book or would it be geared towards an adult audience?
Well, I've got two books in the works. I don't have a name for the children's book that I'm writing, and the episodes about the podcast and the book are going to continue on with that kind of genre. But my goal is to really sit down and write a novel, and to write a perhaps a legal mystery novel with a few twists and turns in it that most people won't anticipate. I've enjoyed reading John Grisham's work. I've enjoyed watching the movies that get made from his work, and I think I might get to that point. They say that you finally become well known as an author when you've published 10 books. So I've got three, and I'm on my way.
You're halfway there with 3 and 2.
Almost.
Yeah, congratulations on what you've produced and what you will continue to produce.
Thank you, Dan.
Um, well, I've kind of run out of questions. I think we can draw this podcast to a conclusion unless you'd like to say something else.
No, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk with you and be on your show. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And that's another episode of Authors Reads. If you are an author and have a poem or a short story or an excerpt of a nonfiction work that you'd like to get out there, please contact me at djng@earthlink.net. If you would like me to forward a question onto my guest, please email me at djng@earthlink.net. But that's it for this time. Thanks for listening. Bye bye now.